he handed me a sandwich, and I gave him the last letter my brother ever wrote. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The city alley was a narrow, forgotten artery, its brick walls tattooed with faded graffiti, its air thick with the scent of damp cardboard and the ghosts of 1,000 hurried, anonymous transactions. Elias Thorne, a man more at home in the quiet, hallowed halls of libraries and archives, found himself navigating this gritty landscape on a personal errand, a shortcut to a small, specialist bookbinder tucked away in the city's labyrinthine heart. He moved with his usual quiet, observant demeanor, his worn tweed jacket a stark, anachronistic contrast to the urban decay that surrounded him. In his pocket, his fingers idly traced the smooth, cool surface of an old, intricately geared pocket watch, its hands long since stilled, a memento from a mentor who had taught him that time's true measure was not in minutes and hours, but in moments of connection, of understanding, of quiet, principled action. As he rounded a corner, he saw a figure huddled in a recessed doorway, a man whose presence was a study in weary, almost invisible stillness. He was older, his face a roadmap of hardship, his clothes threadbare, a faded army green duffel bag resting at his feet like a loyal, exhausted companion. He was a veteran, Elias surmised, not just from the bag, but from a certain disciplined posture that even profound weariness could not entirely erase. The man was not begging, not asking for anything. He was simply being a quiet, overlooked fixture in the city's relentless, indifferent flow. Elias felt that familiar, insistent tug, the quiet imperative of his conscience. He was not a man to offer easy, often meaningless, charity. He preferred to offer something else, something perhaps more valuable, a moment of acknowledgement, of shared humanity. He approached the doorway slowly, his footsteps making little sound on the grimy pavement. The man looked up as Elias drew near, his eyes, the color of a faded winter sky, initially wary, defensive, the look of someone long accustomed to being moved on, to being treated as an inconvenience, a problem. Evening, Elias said, his voice low, calm. It's a cold one. The man didn't reply immediately, his gaze assessing Elias, trying to discern his intentions. Then, with a curt, almost imperceptible nod, he acknowledged Elias's presence. That it is, he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. Elias didn't press. He simply stood there for a moment, sharing the meager shelter of the doorway, a silent offering of solidarity. He then reached into his satchel and took out a small, foil-wrapped package. I have an extra sandwich, he said, his tone casual, unassuming. My landlady always packs me too much. Ham and cheese. It's not much, but it's fresh. Would you care for it? The man stared at him, a flicker of surprise, then suspicion in his tired eyes. A sandwich, he repeated, as if the word were a foreign concept. Why? Because no one should go hungry on a cold night, Elias replied simply. No other reason. He held out the sandwich. For a long moment, the man hesitated, his pride warring with his need. Then, slowly, his gnarled, trembling hand reached out and took it. Thank you, he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the simple, unexpected offering. As he took the sandwich, a small, folded envelope, creased and worn, slipped from his own pocket and fluttered to the ground. Before Elias could react, the man, with a sudden, almost panicked urgency, snatched it up. But in that brief moment, Elias had seen the single, stark initial written on the front, an initial that sparked a faint, distant, and deeply unsettling flicker of recognition in the vast, quiet archive of his own memory. The man clutched the envelope tightly, a look of profound, almost fearful, possessiveness in his eyes. He then looked at Elias, a new, strange expression on his face, a mixture of his earlier wariness and a dawning, hesitant, and utterly inexplicable hope. The stilled pocket watch in Elias's hand felt suddenly heavy, its intricate, unmoving gears a silent testament to the complex, often hidden, mechanisms of the past, and the unexpected ways in which they could suddenly, jarringly, spring back to life. The man, whose name Elias still did not know, continued to clutch the worn envelope, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on Elias with a strange, unnerving intensity. The simple, quiet moment of shared humanity had been disrupted, charged with a new, unspoken tension. The initial on the envelope. Elias's mind raced, sifting through the dusty, forgotten files of his long life. It was a common enough initial, yet in a certain context, tied to a certain time, a certain place. "You don't remember me, do you?" the man finally said, his voice a hoarse, almost accusatory, whisper. Elias looked at him, truly looked at him, trying to see beyond the ravages of time and hardship, searching for a ghost of a younger face, a flicker of a familiar spirit in those weary, faded eyes. There was something, a certain set to the jaw, a particular way he held his head, but the memory remained stubbornly, frustratingly veiled. "I'm sorry," Elias said honestly, his voice filled with a gentle regret. "My memory, it is not what it once was. Should I know you?" The man let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "No," he said, a profound bitterness in his tone. "I suppose not. Why should you? I'm just another ghost, another forgotten soldier." The phrase forgotten soldier struck a chord deep within Elias. It was a theme that had preoccupied him for much of his life, the subject of his books, the focus of his quiet, solitary research. "No soldier," Elias said, his voice firm, unwavering, "should ever be forgotten. Their service, their sacrifice, it is a debt that can never be fully repaid, but it must always, always be remembered." The man stared at him, a new, more intense, light dawning in his eyes. You really believe that, don't you?" "Ido," Elias affirmed. "With every fiber of my being." The man seemed to come to a decision. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then, with a hand that trembled almost uncontrollably, he held out the worn, creased envelope to Elias. "Here," he said, his voice a raw, desperate sound. "Read it, please. I've carried it for too long. Maybe you're the one who's supposed to finally hear it." Elias was taken aback. "My friend," he began, "I couldn't possibly intrude on." "It's not an intrusion," the man insisted, his voice gaining a strange, almost feverish urgency. It's a story that needs to be told. And you're a storyteller, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. You're a man who understands the weight of the past." Reluctantly, his heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and a profound, empathetic curiosity, Elias took the letter. It felt warm from the man's hand, imbued with the heat of a long-held and clearly painful secret. "All right," Elias said softly. "I'll read it." The man nodded, a look of immense, almost unbearable, relief washing over his face. He then did something that surprised Elias even more. He reached into his faded duffel bag and took out a small, tarnished silver frame. He held it out to Elias. Inside, behind a cracked piece of glass, was a faded photograph of a young man in a crisp military uniform, his smile bright, his eyes full of a confident, youthful hope. And beside him, his arm slung casually over the soldier's shoulder, was a much younger Elias Thorne, his own face unlined, his expression serious, thoughtful, yet with a hint of the same youthful optimism that shone from his companion's eyes. The memory, the connection, the identity of the man before him hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. Samuel Hemlock, a young man from his own small, long-forgotten hometown, a boy he had grown up with, a friend whose younger brother, Michael, had served and died alongside Elias's own brother in that same distant, forgotten conflict. The man before him was not just a forgotten soldier. He was a part of Elias's own forgotten past, a living, breathing ghost from a chapter of his life he had long believed to be sealed, buried, lost to the relentless, indifferent march of time. The shock of recognition was a physical jolt, a sudden, dizzying realignment of Elias's perception of the world. He stared at the photograph, at the image of his younger self, a self he barely recognized, standing beside a vibrant, hopeful young man who bore only a faint, ghostly resemblance to the broken, weathered figure now huddled in the doorway before him. Samuel, Elias whispered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, profound sorrow. Samuel Hemlock? Is that really you? Samuel nodded, a single, weary movement. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. The ghost of him, anyway, he said, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. The part that's left. Elias was speechless. He looked from the photograph to Samuel's face, trying to bridge the chasm of the intervening decades, trying to reconcile the bright, confident boy from his memory with the haunted, defeated man who now stood before him. The questions, a tumultuous flood of them, rose in his mind. What had happened? How had he come to this? What series of misfortunes, what accumulation of sorrows had led him from that sunlit moment in the photograph to this dark, damp alleyway? But he knew this was not the time for questions. This was a time for quiet acknowledgement, for a simple, profound bearing of witness to the devastating, often unseen, ravages of time and trauma. He handed the photograph back to Samuel, his own hands trembling slightly. I am so sorry, Samuel, Elias said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. I had no idea. I thought, after your brother, after Michael. I heard you had moved away, started a new life. I tried, Samuel said, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity. For a while. But the war, it has a long reach, Elias. It follows you. And some of us aren't strong enough to outrun it. He clutched the letter, which Elias still held, a little tighter. That, he said, his gaze dropping to the worn envelope. That's from him. From Michael. The last letter he ever wrote. It arrived after we already knew he was gone. The revelation was another blow, another layer of tragedy added to an already unbearable story. Elias looked down at the letter in his hand. It was no longer just a mysterious artifact. It was a sacred relic, a final communication from a dead soldier to a family that would soon be shattered by his loss. He now understood the weight of it, the reason it had become too heavy for Samuel to carry. It was the weight of a love that had been silenced, of a future that had been stolen, of a grief that had festered, unspoken for decades. He asked me to give it to our parents, Samuel continued, his voice a hoarse whisper. But I couldn't. They were already so broken. I thought it would be a kindness to spare them this one last, beautiful, heartbreaking piece of him. So I kept it. I carried it. For all these years. A secret. A burden. He looked up at Elias, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading exhaustion. But I can't carry it anymore, Elias, he said. I'm too tired. And you were his friend. You were my brother's friend. You understand. You, of all people, will understand. Elias looked at the letter, then at the haunted, broken face of his long-lost friend. The still pocket watch in his pocket seemed to tick with a silent, profound urgency. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he had been led to this alley, to this man, to this moment, for a reason. He was not just a historian, a chronicler of the past. He was a part of this story, a living link to a shared history of love, of loss, of a quiet, enduring, and profoundly human sorrow. Yes, Samuel, Elias said softly, his voice a quiet, unwavering promise. I understand, and I will read it. For you, and for Michael. Elias found his way back to the small, all-night cafe. The letter from Michael Hemlock, a heavy, potent presence in his satchel. The city was beginning to stir, the first signs of a new day appearing on the horizon. But Elias felt as if he were still trapped in the long, dark night of Samuel's story. He ordered a cup of black coffee, its bitterness a welcome, grounding sensation, and then, with a sense of profound, almost reverent trepidation, he took out the letter and carefully unfolded its brittle, time-worn pages. The handwriting was young, confident, the script of a man who still believed in the future, who still held onto a fragile, tenacious hope. Dear Mom, Dad, and Sammy. The letter began, the familial address, a poignant counterpoint to the harsh reality of its origin. I hope this letter finds you all well. and that the spring planting is going smoothly. I think of you all every day, of the farm, of the smell of the rain on the fields. It all seems a world away from here, but it's the thought of it, the memory of it, that keeps me going." Elias read on, his heart aching with a profound, empathetic sorrow. The letter was a beautiful, heartbreaking tapestry of a young soldier's thoughts, a mixture of homesickness, a quiet, understated courage, and a deep, abiding love for the family he had left behind. He wrote of his comrades, of the small, shared moments of humor and humanity that made the unbearable bearable. He wrote of his dreams for the future, of his plans to return home, to help his father on the farm, to perhaps, one day, start a family of his own. He wrote with a simple, unadorned eloquence, his words a testament to a good, kind, and honorable young man facing an unimaginable reality with a quiet, unwavering grace. Then, the letter took a more serious, more somber turn. "There's something I need to tell you," Michael had written, his script becoming a little less steady, as if the words themselves were difficult to form. "Something happened here. A few days ago, we were on patrol, and we came under heavy fire. It was bad, real bad. A lot of good men were lost." Elias had to pause, his own breath catching in his throat. He knew this story, had heard variations of it 100 times in his research, had lived through his own version of it with the loss of his own brother. It was the timeless, tragic narrative of war, a story of chaos, of fear, of the random, senseless cruelty of fate. Our platoon leader, Michael's letter continued, "A good man, a brave man. He was hit. Badly. We were pinned down, couldn't move. The medics couldn't get to him. And he was bleeding out. We all knew he wasn't going to make it." Elias could almost see the scene, could almost smell the acrid scent of cordite, could almost hear the terrifying, deafening roar of battle. And then Michael wrote, his handwriting now almost a scrawl. "One of our guys, a quiet kid, a writer, a guy who always seemed to have his head in the clouds. He did something I'll never forget. He crawled out there, under fire, with no weapon, just his medical kit. He got to the lieutenant, tried to stop the bleeding, tried to save him. He stayed with him, talking to him, comforting him, even as the lieutenant was dying. He didn't leave his side, not for a second, even when the rest of us were screaming at him to get back, to save himself." Elias's heart was pounding now, a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He had a sudden, chilling premonition, a dawning, impossible suspicion. That quiet kid, Michael's letter concluded, the final lines a testament to a courage that defied all comprehension. He didn't make it back either. He was hit, just as he was trying to crawl back to our position. He died, trying to save a man he knew was already gone. He died for a principle, for a belief in the simple, profound, human duty to not let another man die alone. His name was Thorne. He was your friend, Elias. Your brother. The letter slipped from Elias's trembling fingers, fluttering onto the cafe table. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the quiet, anonymous diner dissolving into a blur of meaningless shapes and sounds. His brother. His quiet, gentle, book-loving brother. He had always known his brother had died heroically. The official report had said as much in its cold, clinical military prose. But he had never known this. He had never known the true, breathtaking, heartbreaking story of his brother's final moments. He had never known that his brother's last act on this earth had been one of such profound, selfless, and ultimately futile courage. And he had never known that Samuel Hemlock's brother, Michael, had been there, had witnessed it all, had carried this story, this sacred, terrible secret, with him for all these long, silent, tormented years. The revelation struck Elias with the force of a physical blow, a seismic shock that rearranged the very foundations of his own personal history. He sat stunned, the letter lying on the table before him, its faded blue ink a testament to a truth he had never known, a story that had been waiting, in silence, for decades to be heard. His brother, the quiet, introspective boy who had loved poetry, who had dreamed of becoming a teacher, had died not just as a soldier, but as a hero of the highest, most profound order, his final act a testament to a courage that was almost beyond comprehension. And Samuel Hemlock, the broken, forgotten man he had met in a rainy doorway, had been the keeper of that story, the silent, tormented witness to his brother's sacrifice. Elias now understood, with a devastating, heartbreaking clarity, the true weight of the burden Samuel had been carrying. It was not just his own grief, his own trauma, his own losses. It was the weight of this story, this sacred, terrible knowledge, a story he had been unable to share, a secret that had festered within him, poisoning his life, contributing to the slow, tragic unraveling of his world. He understood now why Samuel had been so insistent that Elias, and only Elias, read the letter. It was not just a confession. It was a delivery, a passing on of a sacred trust, a final, desperate attempt to fulfill a duty that had haunted him for half a lifetime. He had been tasked with telling a story of heroism, and in his own brokenness, had been unable to do so. And so he had found the one person in the world who needed to hear it most, the one person who could truly understand its profound, personal significance. Elias carefully, reverently, picked up the letter. He read the final lines again, his vision blurring with tears. He thought of Samuel, of his own brother, of Michael Hemlock, of all the young men, the quiet heroes whose stories had been lost, forgotten, buried under the weight of time and indifference. He felt a surge of emotions so powerful, so overwhelming, that it threatened to consume him: grief, sorrow, a profound, aching pride, and a new, fierce, and unwavering sense of purpose. He knew, with an absolute certainty, what he had to do. This story, his brother's story, Michael's story, Samuel's story, could not be allowed to remain a secret, a private sorrow. It had to be told. It had to be honored. It was a debt owed not just to the dead, but to the living. He thought of Samuel, wandering the cold, indifferent streets of the city, a man who had been a hero in his own right, a keeper of a sacred flame, yet who saw himself as a failure, a ghost. He thought of Samuel's daughter, Lily, a woman who likely knew nothing of her uncle's quiet courage, or of the profound, hidden nobility of the father she believed had abandoned her. Elias paid for his coffee, his mind now clear, his resolve absolute. He stepped out of the cafe and into the bright, cold light of a new day. His own personal errands, his research, his quiet, solitary life, all of it seemed secondary now, insignificant in the face of this new, profound, and deeply personal mission. He had to find Samuel again, not just to thank him, not just to share in their mutual, long-buried grief, but to help him, to restore to him the dignity, the honor he so richly deserved. And he had to find Lily. He had to tell her the story of her uncle and of her father. He had to give her back a piece of her own history, a legacy of quiet courage that was her birthright. The still pocket watch in his hand felt like a silent command. Tom had stood still for too long. It was time to set the hands in motion again, to mend what had been broken, to bring light to the long, dark shadows of the past. The search for Samuel, which had been a matter of quiet, empathetic concern just the day before, now became a mission of profound, personal urgency for Elias. He retraced his steps, his mind a whirl of possibilities, his heart a tumultuous sea of grief and a new, fierce determination. He returned to the Veterans Outreach Center, to the soup kitchens, to the quiet, forgotten parks where the city's invisible population sought refuge. This time, however, he was not just looking for a homeless veteran. He was looking for his friend, for the keeper of his brother's story, for a man to whom he now felt an unbreakable, lifelong bond. He described Samuel again, but this time his description was imbued with a new, more personal intensity. He spoke not just of a man in a threadbare coat, but of a man with faded flag blue eyes that held a universe of unspoken sorrow, of a man whose quiet dignity had survived decades of hardship. He showed the faded photograph of the two of them, of Samuel and his brother, Michael, their youthful faces a stark, poignant contrast to the harsh realities of the present. He told a small, edited part of the story, enough to convey the urgency, the importance of his search. And this time, his plea resonated. The social workers, the volunteers, the other veterans, they saw the raw, genuine emotion in Elias's eyes. They heard the profound conviction in his voice, and they began to help. They made calls. They spread the word through the city's intricate, informal network of street communication. The search for Samuel Hemlock became a quiet, collective endeavor, a testament to the enduring power of community, of a shared, unspoken understanding of the bonds of service and of loss. For 2 days, Elias searched, his hope beginning to wane, a cold fear beginning to creep into his heart. What if Samuel had simply disappeared again, swallowed by the city's vast, indifferent anonymity? What if he had given Elias the letter only to retreat back into his solitary world of grief, believing his duty was finally done? But Elias refused to give up. He was driven by a force more powerful than his own weariness, a force born of a brother's love, a friend's loyalty, and a historian's unwavering belief in the redemptive power of a story told. On the 3rd day, he received a call. It was from the social worker at the first outreach center he had visited. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice filled with a quiet excitement, "I think we've found him. A man matching your description, a veteran named Samuel. He just came into our drop-in center. He's not doing well, Mr. Thorne. He's weak, feverish. We're trying to convince him to go to the hospital, but he's refusing. He keeps asking for you." Elias's heart leaped, a mixture of profound relief and a deep, gnawing anxiety. He rushed to the center, his mind racing. When he arrived, he found Samuel lying on a small cot in a quiet back room, his face pale, his breathing shallow. He looked smaller, more fragile than Elias had remembered, as if the final act of giving away his long-held burden had taken the last of his strength. Elias knelt by the cot, his hand gently taking Samuel's, which was cold, almost lifeless. "Samuel," he said softly. "It's me. It's Elias." Samuel's eyes fluttered open. A faint, weak smile touched his lips. "Elias," he whispered, his voice a dry, rustling sound. You read it?" "I read it, Samuel," Elias replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "I read it, and I can never thank you enough. For what you did, for what you carried, for my brother. He was a hero." "Elias," Samuel whispered, his eyes shining with a feverish light. "Your brother, he was the bravest man I ever knew." "You were brave too, Samuel," Elias said, his grip tightening on his friend's hand. "To have witnessed that, to have carried that memory, that took a courage all its own. You were a hero too, my friend. A quiet, unsung hero." Samuel shook his head weakly. "No," he said. I failed. I failed my parents. I failed my daughter. I couldn't even tell them the story." "But you told me, Samuel," Elias said, his voice a quiet, unwavering promise. "And now, we're going to tell it together. But first, my friend, you need to get well. You need to let these good people help you. You need to fight. Not for me, not for the memory of your brother or mine, but for you, and for Lily." At the mention of his daughter's name, a flicker of the old, resilient light returned to Samuel's eyes. He looked at Elias, a silent question in his gaze. Elias simply nodded, a promise, a commitment, passing between them. And slowly, with a strength he didn't seem to possess just moments before, Samuel squeezed Elias's hand. The fight, it seemed, was not over yet. The days that followed were a quiet, tense vigil. Samuel, finally convinced by Elias to accept medical help, was admitted to the local veterans hospital, his body racked with pneumonia and a profound, life-threatening exhaustion. Elias rarely left his side, his presence a constant, quiet source of strength and encouragement. He read to Samuel, not from his usual volumes of poetry, but from Michael's letter. Its words of love encourage a healing balm to Samuel's weary spirit. He also began the difficult, delicate work of trying to find Lily. Armed with the information he had gleaned from his earlier, pre-dawn search, he began to piece together the fragments of her life. He discovered, through a combination of public records and a few discreet inquiries, that she was indeed a teacher, a well-respected and much-loved figure at a local elementary school. He found her address, a small, neat house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. He even found a recent photograph of her in a local newspaper article about the community garden she so lovingly tended at Willow Creek Park. She was beautiful, her face a mixture of her mother's gentle features and her father's quiet, resilient strength. The question now was how to approach her. Elias knew he couldn't simply knock on her door and announce that her long-lost, homeless father was in the hospital. The shock, the emotional turmoil, could be devastating. He needed to be careful, to be patient, to find a way to reintroduce Arthur into her life that was gentle, respectful, and that honored the profound, complex emotions that such a reunion would inevitably entail. He decided to write a letter, a medium he understood, a medium that allowed for a quiet, considered communication, free from the pressures and potential misunderstandings of a face-to-face encounter. He spent an entire evening crafting the letter, his pen moving slowly, carefully across the page. He told Lily who he was, a friend of her father's. He spoke of his recent, chance encounter with Samuel, of the quiet dignity and profound sorrow he had witnessed in the old soldier. He told her of her father's unwavering 20-year vigil, of the small, carved gift he had left for her every year on her birthday, a testament to a love that had never, not for a single moment, faded. And he told her the story of her uncle, Michael, and of her own father's quiet, heroic role as the keeper of that sacred, painful memory. He enclosed a copy of Michael's last letter and a small, simple photograph of the two young soldiers, Elias's brother and her uncle, their arms slung around each other, their faces full of a youthful, heartbreaking hope. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make any demands. He simply offered her the truth, a piece of her own forgotten history, a testament to the quiet, enduring, and profoundly complex love of the father she had lost so long ago. Your father is a good man, Lily, he concluded. A man of quiet courage and profound integrity. He has been fighting a long, lonely war for many, many years, and he is very, very tired. He is currently resting at the Veterans Hospital. He does not know I am writing to you. He would never presume to ask for anything. But I, as his friend, and as the brother of the young man who died beside your uncle, felt you had a right to know. The rest, of course, is up to you. He sealed the letter, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and a profound, empathetic anxiety. He had done all he could. He had told the story. He had offered the truth. Now it was up to Lily. The future of this small, broken family rested on her response, on her willingness to open her heart to a past that was bound to be as painful as it was perhaps ultimately healing. Elias mailed the letter, then returned to the hospital, his vigil by Samuel's side now imbued with a new, almost unbearable sense of anticipation. He didn't tell Samuel what he had done. He didn't want to raise his friend's hopes, only to have them potentially dashed. So he waited, his quiet presence a constant, reassuring anchor in the sterile, impersonal environment of the hospital room. 2 days passed, too long, agonizing days of silence. Elias began to fear the worst. That Lily had received the letter and had chosen not to respond. That the wounds of the past were too deep, the chasm of 20 years too wide to be bridged. That his intervention, however well-intentioned, had been a foolish, misguided mistake. But on the third day, as he was sitting by Samuel's bedside, reading aloud from a book of poetry, a quiet knock came at the door. A young woman stood in the doorway, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, filled with a mixture of trepidation, sorrow, and a profound, searching hope. It was Lily. She held Elias's letter and the enclosed photograph in her trembling hand. She looked at Elias, then at the frail, sleeping figure of her father in the hospital bed. Tears streamed down her face, silent, unrestrained. Elias rose slowly from his chair, his own heart aching with a profound, empathetic joy. He simply nodded to her, a quiet acknowledgement, a gesture of welcome, Then, sensing that this was a moment that belonged to her and her father alone, he slipped quietly out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. He stood in the quiet hospital corridor, his back against the cool wall, and listened. He heard Lily's soft, hesitant footsteps as she approached the bed. He heard a small, choked sob, and then he heard her voice, a whisper, thick with the unshed tears of 20 years. "Daddy," she said. "Daddy, it's me. It's Lily. I'm here." He heard a faint stirring from within the room, a rustle of sheets, then a low, hoarse, incredulous sound. Samuel's voice, speaking his daughter's name for the first time in 2 decades. Elias closed his eyes, a single, grateful tear tracing a path down his own weathered cheek. He didn't need to see what happened next. He could feel it. The embrace, the tears, the flood of emotions, the beginning of a long, difficult, but ultimately beautiful healing. The story, which had begun with a chance encounter on a city bus, which had been fueled by a faded, long unread letter, had reached its quiet, profound, and deeply moving climax. The river stone in Elias's pocket felt warm, a silent testament to the enduring, unbreakable bonds of family, and to the extraordinary power of a love that had refused to be extinguished, even by the darkest of nights, the longest of silences. The quiet historian had not just chronicled the story, he had helped to rewrite its ending. The reunion between Arthur and Lily was not a simple, fairy tale resolution. It was the beginning of a new, complex, and often challenging chapter in their lives. The wounds of 20 years of separation, of misunderstanding, of unspoken grief, were not to be healed in a single afternoon. There were difficult conversations, painful silences, moments of anger and regret. But beneath it all, there was a deep, abiding, and now reawakened love, a love that proved to be a powerful, resilient anchor in the turbulent waters of their shared past. Elias, at their request, remained a quiet, steadying presence in their lives. He became a friend, a confidant, a gentle guide, helping them to navigate the often treacherous terrain of their reconciliation. He would sit with them for hours in the hospital cafeteria, then later in the small, sunny apartment the Veterans Organization had helped Arthur to secure, and he would simply listen. He listened as Arthur, for the first time, began to speak of the war, not of the battles, but of the quiet, human moments, of the fear, of the loss, of the profound, enduring bond he had shared with his brother, Michael, and with Elias's own brother. And he listened as Lily spoke of her own childhood, of her confusion, of her anger, of the profound, aching sense of abandonment that had shaped her life, but also of the faint, persistent hope fueled by the mysterious, hand-carved gift she had found in the park, that her father had not, in fact, forgotten her. Through these shared stories, a new understanding, a new, more compassionate narrative of their family's history began to emerge. It was a story not of blame, but of shared trauma, of flawed, loving human beings struggling to cope with an unbearable loss. It was a story of a father's profound, if misguided, attempt to shield his daughter from his own darkness, and of a daughter's enduring, if often hidden, love for the father she had lost. With the support of Lily and the quiet, unwavering friendship of Elias, Arthur began to heal. He started attending a support group for veterans, where he found a community of men who understood his struggles, who spoke his language. He began to carve again, his old carpenter's hands rediscovering their skill, their purpose, creating beautiful, intricate wooden birds and flowers that were no longer just symbols of a lonely, secret grief, but expressions of a renewed, hopeful spirit. Lily, in turn, began to heal her own wounds. She came to understand the profound, invisible scars her father carried, to see his withdrawal not as a rejection, but as a symptom of a deep, enduring pain. Her anger softened into a profound, empathetic compassion, her sense of abandonment replaced by a fierce, protective love for this broken, beautiful man who was her father. Elias watched this slow, delicate process of healing with a quiet, profound satisfaction. He had been a catalyst, a bridge, a keeper of a sacred story. And in helping to mend this one small, broken family, he felt he had, in some small way, honored the memory of his own lost brother, had given his own quiet, lifelong grief a new, redemptive meaning. The tarnished silver dollar, the stilled pocket watch, the bronze star, they were all just objects. But the stories they represented, the human connections they symbolized, these were the true, enduring treasures. And the story of Arthur and Lily, a story of a love that had survived the ravages of war, of time, of silence, was one of the most precious treasures of all. The seasons turned, and with them, the landscape of Arthur and Lily's relationship continued to evolve, to heal, to blossom in unexpected ways. The initial, tentative steps of their reunion gave way to a more comfortable, more natural rhythm of connection. They spent weekends together, working side by side in the community garden at Willow Creek Park, their shared labor a quiet, therapeutic act of nurturing, of growth. They took long, quiet walks, sharing stories, memories, laughter, and tears, slowly, carefully, weaving together the frayed, severed threads of their shared history. Arthur, with Lily's encouragement and the support of his veterans group, began to find a new sense of purpose. He started a small, informal woodworking class for other veterans at the community center, sharing his long-dormant skills, his quiet, patient wisdom. He found that in teaching others, in helping them to create something beautiful, something tangible with their own hands, he was also, in a way, healing himself. Lily, for her part, found a new sense of peace, of wholeness. The quiet, aching void that had been at the center of her life for so long was now filled with the steady, loving presence of her father. She no longer had to wonder, to guess, to invent stories to explain his absence.